So you've heard my preamble on my experiences as how these spiritual impulses have a healing capacity. And so that's my latest book on the spiritual guide as healer. It's in Kindle edition only right now, and so it's available on Amazon. And so this lecture tonight is a synthesis of this particular book that I enjoyed working on at USC. And so, did you need any more information, Kathy?
Could I just, it's just the spiritual guide as healer?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And so, I'm going to introduce a concept of healing with a term you probably never heard. And the term I'm going to use is social healing. And I'm going to encourage us to think of a form of healing that each one of us in this room could do. And I'm going to give an example. I'm going to take you, and I spent 4 years as a chaplain in the local hospital here. I use volunteer chaplains, and if you'd like to serve as a chaplain and you have spiritual inclinations, you certainly could train and serve here in our local hospital. And so when I arrived, I thought that would be a wonderful way to get to know our medical community here, and so I served in that capacity. And as you go into a room in the hospital, and the setting is, I'll use the setting. There's a patient in the bed. There's a physician that enters into the room and is doing what the medical community does so well here in our community. And there's a there's 4 family members that are around the bed that are obviously struggling with the illness that's happening with the individual in the bed. And you walk in. And the question I have for you is, how many people are sick?
Sounds like a trick question.
Well, what's the word? The word I've used is sick. What does the word sick mean?
Yeah.
Yes, not right.
Okay. Pardon?
Not right.
Not right. Something's not right. Okay. What other definitions could you use for the term sick?
Well, in slang, it's good. Just like the word bad turned good
Yeah.
for a while. Now sick. Somebody says, "Oh, that's sick." You
Yeah,
know,
we have a
let's
culture
hit that jump. You know, it's
inverts meaning to our words, and yeah, that's what happens. And so we have sick, but we'll use it in the classic sense, okay? If that's okay with you. What's the word sick mean? Kathy, say yours again.
Not right.
Not right. Now I'll ask the question. How many people are sick?
Everyone?
Theoretically.
Yes.
Everyone in the room.
Unless you're perfect health being defined as impossible, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if you make it a definition that your biological functions are in disarray, if you wanted to make that your definition, then only one person's sick. But if we simply live with Kathy's decision that something's not right, then the person in the bed is clearly in trouble, but the whole family is not right. And that is my example of what I'd like to call social healing. When you walk into the room, anywhere, in any capacity, and there is sickness, something is not right. If you only focus on the biologically sick person, you might be able to get something done, but probably not. You're not a physician. And so our physicians are trained to manage biological illnesses that strike us in ways that are quite profound. But if you choose to watch those in the room that are socially ill, every one of you has a job to do. And so the term I'm using of social healing is the ancient method of the shaman. The shaman would be primarily doing social healing when they were functioning in their villages for 10,000 years. That was their primary method of healing. And so it's very difficult when you compare modern medicine with its biological mechanisms of healing with the shaman and their social mechanisms of healing. And so it's always an intriguing way to... So what I'm asking you to consider is the ancient form of healing and not just the modern form of healing. That we need both. And our key problem is the failure of modern medicine to understand social healing. Just the chaplain walking into the room is often not trained as well to deal with the family problems that are going on. They too tend to work the patient in the bed with whatever spiritual gifts they can offer that person. But I like to cue every chaplain that I lecture to, folks, what's the definition of illness? And if you want to talk about those 4 family members, you, the chaplain, have an awful lot of work to do in that room, because there's 4 additional people that are not well. They're messed up. And so that begins the journey of trying to understand what this means. And it also begins the journey of empowerment for you. I've got work to do whenever I go into a dysfunctional setting. And a hospital room is the classic dysfunctional setting. Biologically, yes, but it's also socially dysfunctional on a grand scale whenever you walk into the room. Whenever you walk into a room in your own home and someone is sick, watch the dysfunction happen. It's dysfunction on steroids going around as people are doing that. So my approach to this problem is to empower spiritual guides to recognize their role as spiritual and social healers in American healthcare. Okay? If you see it, you might solve it. But if you can't see it, the solution will elude you. And so that's what I'm going to ask you to think about this entire evening. Is could you be a spiritual guide that serves as a spiritual and social healer? Because I promise you, modern medicine is not going to be dealing with whatever the spiritual can do and whatever the social is going to do. They are not going there. They do not have time. They do not have the training. And they don't see it. These are good people, but if you're not trained to see something, you're not going to solve something. But if we cue you tonight to say you could be a spiritual guide with spiritual and social capacity to heal, then that's an interesting task you've now been alerted to. Accept it or reject it, but at least it's going to be offered.
When I think of a spiritual guide, I don't think of a person, I think of something of an ether. So you're saying that people, if like the chaplain, like you're the chaplain, then.
Yes. So a spiritual guide I'm using, again, and our culture has a natural inclination to say, I only want to talk to the big guy upstairs. And I want a direct communication to the big guy upstairs. That's classic American mechanisms of spirituality. But virtually everywhere else in the world, you're going to have an intermediary that you're going to go to. You're going to have a monk. You're going to have a priest. You're going to have a pastor. You're going to have a chaplain. Virtually everywhere else, you go through an intermediary for your spiritual guidance. So one of the tasks I've got is to also recognize that a spiritual guide is a job description for human beings. It is something you can do. And it is a profound task that everyone that puts the glasses on can begin seeing. So as I mentioned, these are the three comparisons that I'm working on, have been working on: shamanism, Buddhism, and Mexican spiritualism. And so that's what I'll be doing for my comparison, mainly because virtually no one in our culture has been exposed to these three areas of interest. So the knowledge, Mexican spiritualism is arriving because of our Hispanic population. But again, we've got such poor Buddhism education within most of America that's not a form. And we tend to consider shamans as evil. The American culture will tend to think of shamans as evil, and therefore they've been programmed to stay away from them. So what you could learn from a shaman is typically given an evil title, and it's sort of dead in the water before you even begin. And so that's one of the other areas I have to work on, is I have to get the evil label off of shamanism before I can be productive as to what a shaman is trying to do. And it comes from our understanding of what illness is. If we only think a doctor can heal the biological issues, then we use that. Then we invert that language by saying, a shaman is not going to be healing an awful lot of biological issues. They're just not going to be doing that. And so you tend to treat anything that is the inverse of what is positive in our society as evil, and shamans have achieved that title. So these are interesting for those that enjoy learning. So the pathway I'm going to use tonight is, first I'm going to offer an understanding of the larger healing processes that inform all settings of... Wow, why did I stop? I think I need some more editing. All settings of healthcare, I think, is what I'm going to say, is what I want to say. But I better make some adjustments here. There are larger healing processes in the healthcare system that, again, if we don't put the glasses on, we're not going to see them. And we're going to intervene differently, depending on what these processes are. Second, we're going to do analysis of the healing practices and successes of the three traditions. Tonight, I'm just going to focus on Buddhism and give you a sense of how Buddhists have been successful in spiritual healing. And then we can ask the questions, well, why? I think we've been very mind conscious in our class. And we can become now physically conscious as to healing capacities, as well as mind capacities. And fourth, we're going to develop a new form of healing defined as social healing. So I think my story should have cued you what I'm going to be saying. But I'd like to work through this so that you get some meat on the bones of what's a job description that you never thought you'd ever get in this life. And you've already realized, oh, something's coming my way here. Comments so far?
When you talked about being a chaplain, I remember as my mom was very, very ill and just about to die, the chaplain came into the room and focused on my mom. And I was angry at him. I didn't want him in that room right then.
Interesting.
Because I thought that's a sign that she's not going to be around much longer if they call him a chaplain.
Okay.
And he just was focused on Mom. He should have been focused on me too.
Yeah.
But that just, you said that, and that just came to mind.
What a story.
Along with my anger.
Yeah, and your anger's there.
It is.
Yeah, and you don't want them to do last rites on your relatives. And last rites are an indication that they are going to die. And
what should he have, what would you have done in that situation?
Normally when I go in the room, I like to greet everybody and figure out what's happening in the room. And then sense if I should be there. And so first is to greet the patient, because that person is the one that deserves all the focus we can give them. But then I immediately greet the family and try and sort out the relationships and why they're here and how far they're traveling and whether they're missing work and just anything that I can to be informed in what's going on. and then come back and offer help and care spiritual care to the person in bed. So it's a challenge to know where you can be most useful. It is truly a challenge, and this is why I sort of enjoy this. What's so intriguing is healing the sick has been the number one goal of most religions in America. What is the name of every hospital you can think of?
Christian.
Give me some examples.
St. Luke's.
St. Luke's. We'll start there. Who's St. Luke? Who's that? Anybody know who St. Luke is? Since we got it, it's in our front page of our paper today on the new St. Luke's building that's going, who the heck is St. Luke? That would be an interesting story to tell, wouldn't it, in our community? Does anyone know who St. Luke is? He wrote the Gospel it's called Luke. He wasn't a disciple. He wasn't one of the 12. He was reputed to be a physician. He was reputed to be a Gentile physician who was also a slave in the Roman Empire because they tended to suck up all of the best educated. And if they had any medical training, they'd pull them into the Roman army so that they could deal with the issues as the army moves through places. And so Luke was one of these kinds of physicians. And so his entire gospel, if you read it from a medical perspective, is a wonderful way of seeing how a physician would think about the Jesus story. And so it's a fascinating perception. That's St. Luke. Isn't that interesting? You know, but it's a story that's utterly gone in this community, except for a few people. But I mean, it's a fairly rare story for most people. And certainly St. Luke's doesn't magnify that. There probably won't be a plaque at the front of the new building talking about St. Luke. What other hospitals have you encountered?
St. Alphonsus.
St. Alphonsus. And a little more expected, this is a Catholic health system, so you expect their hospitals to have Christian names on them. But can you think of any hospital that doesn't have a spiritual religious name?
Monterey Peninsula
Okay.
Hospital.
Monterey Peninsula Hospital, and it's a local hospital. Yeah, okay. Pretty rare, isn't it? So my point is, healing the sick is a religious task, has always been in the history of humanity, been primarily a religious task. But in America, we've made it so expensive and so technologically sophisticated that the religious people can no longer do it. And then they have slowly ebbed out of all these institutions. It was named St. Luke's because early on it was an Episcopal hospital. And so the little Episcopal church here is sort of is part of the story. And so that issue is intriguing. The primary focus of healing within most religions remains the cure of the soul. So it isn't your bodily problems that most religious people come to you to talk about when it comes to healing the sick. It's equivalent to if you know the story in Christianity, when Jesus healed the person that came through the roof. Did any of you in your journey ever come across that story? There was a person who was sick, his friends, there were so many people around Jesus that his friends went up on the roof, stripped the roof off, and dropped this guy down in front of Jesus. You can imagine the scene of this. I've always been intrigued to know who the householder was at this house. I was up my roof today. I would not appreciate someone ripping my roof off so they could drop someone in front of Jesus. But this is the story. And he looks at the guy, and the guy's clearly been ill for a long time. And the first thing Jesus does is he says, "Your sins are forgiven."
Wow.
And you go, well, why did you deal with that first? Just heal the guy. Because in the previous story, he just touched somebody's eyes and the person could see. And he didn't throw any spiritual connotation into that. He just healed the guy's eyes and he could see. And this story, he's dealing with these spiritual issues. Stop your sinning. And cure of the soul has classically been to deal with those spiritual issues of our life. They're not the biological illnesses that we encounter. But there is that premise that your sin has caused much of your sickness. And so if you heal the sin, then the sickness will be healed by itself. And I think we can look at alcoholism, we can look at drug addiction, we can look at an awful lot of things that causes an extraordinary amount of illness. And the term sin in its best definition is typically defined as that which destroys the world around you, is what a sin is. And so if you deal with the things that people do that destroy the world around them, then the world around them is better, by logical extension. And the disease state that comes from heavy alcohol consumption, from addiction, from excessive sexuality, from all the disease states that flow from those parts of life are typically what you're saying when you're saying cure of the soul. You're curing those desires that we've already heard about in Hinduism and Buddhism. You're curing yourself of those desires that's destructive for you. The desires for alcohol, the desires for drugs, the desires for someone else's spouse. Those desires can lead you in a place of sickness. And so the religions have focused there, assuming that the illness will be solved. But the dilemma of modern medicine is that if you're only going to focus on the endpoint illness, then nobody is working on the cause of the illness, which probably has a social origin. Does that make sense? So the social healing is actually healing those things that are destroying the world around the individual. If you can do that, the illness goes away by extension. Does that make sense? And so that's where the religions have worked on, is the cure of what's called the cure of the soul. And that term isn't going to go over very well with Buddhism. They don't like ensoulment doctrine, but it's a very good narrative for Hinduism. Hinduism has a nice definition of the soul and would agree with this heartily in lots of ways. The religious community offers promises the salvation of individuals as individuals from sickness, poverty, and from all sorts of distress and danger. And this is my key guy that I studied for my dissertation, is Max Weber, German sociologist. And so he gave me all sorts of quotes that are wonderful. And so the religious community promises that if you cure your soul, then sickness is going to go away, poverty is going to go away, and distress and danger is going to go away. And it usually works. It usually works. And that's sort of the point of religion in every culture. It gives you a vehicle to, in economic terms, move from lower middle class into the middle class. Almost always it's religion that drives you into that. Now, how does it function? Religion causes discipline in your life that allows you to not spend all your money on things that'll hurt you. There's a discipline that comes with all the religions, and if you can impose a discipline on an individual, then there's an economic consequence to that. If alcohol is going to be your cause of tremendous devastation in your community, and you enter into a religious community and they say, you're not to drink anymore, you've just put hundreds of dollars back in your bank account. You've just stopped an awful lot of the social repercussions all throughout the family that alcohol was lubricating. And you've given you an opportunity of taking those economic resources and driving yourself into a higher level of community, which you'll devolve in if you maintain heavy alcohol use. But you've got to find a lever point that allows you to say, I'm not going to take any more alcohol. Now, you can put that through any of the disasters we can walk ourselves into. But all of them, if you could find a religious community that gives you the discipline, which is what we were seeing in Hinduism and we'll see in Buddhism, is you need to take the desires away, take the desires away, take the desires away. The minute you succeed at taking the desires away, you're putting money in your pocket. You're improving your family. You're having a tremendous consequence as a result of the discipline that any religion can offer you. Making sense? So it's a vehicle of economic advancement for anyone. And so sickness, poverty, distress, and danger, that's why they disappear. The causes of all of those are being mitigated. They're being reduced in your life because you're not using the desires to walk into the issues of sickness and walk into poverty and walk into distress and walk into danger. They'll all give you tools of staying away from them. All religions. It's part of their goal. It's part of their social function. Any group that can offer effective healing will find its concomitant messages more palatable to listening audiences. And so they'll get on TV and say, I'm going to heal you. Someone's in a wheelchair and I know they need to be done. And they'll put their hands on them and whoop, they'll be up and down the aisle and I'm healed. Woo, people want that. People want that. And if you can offer healing that's effective, then your spiritual messages, I'm going to cure your soul, have a practical consequence to it. So the capacity of healing physically is the light that goes on to say this person is real, this person is spiritual, this person is religious, this person has got what it takes to do a much broader form of religion than just my physician at home. So the process of healing usually requires the services of a healer. I'm sorry I told a story where I didn't have the services of a healer. I just did it myself in my own personal healing. But most of the time it takes somebody. Somebody's got to have the glasses on to say, I can heal you. And if those glasses give them a pathway, it's serious. It could happen. This charismatic individual becomes the conduit that brings the healing properties that are found in every major belief system. Every one of them that you'll study. You'll see the healing results. Not just socially, but physically. You will see. And one of the reasons religions thrive is they can show this. They can show this. Some try and document it. I was at I read a fascinating paper on the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has the right of healing. And if you want to be a saint, St. Luke, if you want to be a saint in the Catholic Church, you have to be, they have to be able to document healings. So it's not just you've been a good person, there are healings that can be documented from your work. And so there's literally an office in the Vatican, and that's their job before anyone can be can achieve sainthood. But they have to run around and document the healings. And so at one point I said, I want to know how many healings does the Catholic Church document every year? So that they have the X-rays, they've got all the medical studies, they got everything. They can document healings that happened because of spiritual inclinations, whether it was someone that was going to be a saint, someone that is a saint, whatever. They want to document. They want to prove that it's real spiritual healing. And the number that came back was so fascinating. 13 every year is the average. 13 every year. Now the good news is there's one. The bad news is everybody assumes that they're going to be healed. So you assume the number's in the billions, because everybody wants to be healed, and every story has a healing to it. And every family wants a story from their religious tradition and how they're being healed. But that number really slows down that problem. Folks, there aren't a lot that can be documented, but there's more than one, and there is one. And so spiritual healing has a role Just don't magnify it until it's meaningless. Just don't magnify it. And so, so you have to ask the questions, how do we get healed? How do we do that? Healings are usually wrapped in cultural religious ritual that frames the healing within a context that narrates meaning to the seeker. Now let's make that real. Tell me the story of what the doctor will look like when he or she walks into your room and you're sick in the hospital. What will they look like? And they'll all look the same. What do they look like?
White jacket,
They'll all have a white jacket on. Why? What does white mean?
purity.
Purity. Yeah, they'll all wear a white jacket, and often they'll change jackets for the different roles. So, but the physician, usually, unless they're coming out of surgery, if they're coming into the room and it's a non-surgical garb, then they'll usually have a white jacket on. Okay, what else will they do?
The stethoscope.
The stethoscope. What's that mean? Who in the hospital can have a stethoscope around their neck?
A doctor.
And a nurse. So both the doctor and the nurse can carry a stethoscope. What does that say to you when the stethoscope arrives?
They're going to heal you or look at you?
They have the capacity of listening to you
Yes.
and hearing what your body is saying, and they are symbolizing that they can heal you with the stethoscope. That's your number one symbol of healing that walks into the room. If they don't have a stethoscope around their neck, you're real nervous that this is not someone that can heal you. Okay? Or anything they're going to say is not going to... So it's got to be in one of the pockets, and they stick it, make sure it sticks out. Okay, it's a small enough pocket, so the dang thing has to be shown. Or it's around the neck, it's somewhere, and that's your sense of healing, is when you see that as well. You see the white coat, you see the healing. What else do you say? What else do you... You see a name badge. What's going to be on it?
Doctor so-and-so.
Doctor. So you're going to see an official title. Now, I might walk in there with my doctor in front of my name, and they might not be quite as impressed. In fact, I would never do that. I would never wear my title in that setting. Why? Because I would fluster people. I would have to explain my doctorhood. So I would never do that in that setting, because you're there to give them all the symbols of success. As much as anything else, they want to see symbols of success. And so that's the context and the symbols of a ritual, folks, is the walking in of the medical community to the side of an ill person. That is as symbolic as a shaman going around the fire. That is the same symbolic atmosphere that's being created. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay? And then your brain is ready to be healed because you've seen the symbols of healing. You're ready to accept that piece of paper with scribbles on it that no one else can read. And you're prepared to go there and talk to another healer in the pharmacy and about that. So in the vast majority of healings, a wide array of contributing elements. You've got psychological, sociological, moral, spiritual. They're all at work. These elements contribute to a varying degree to the disease, and most must be dealt with for the effective resolution of the illness. And so if you agree with me, I should have put biological in here. You've got to have psychological, biological, sociological, moral, and spiritual components, okay, to be healed. All of us need all of those to be healed from the majority of the diseases we're working on. But usually, modern medicine only deals with the biological, sometimes the sociological. Your social worker will be there. Psychological, your counselor may come in. But we don't have often a moral or a spiritual guide in most of the settings that we have. So healing is in essence an act of recreation. All an afflicted person can do is send for the socially approved authority who can manipulate the symbols of healing with sacred stole, drums, or stethoscope to render healing in the ill. Okay, that's how a religion scholar thinks about healing. Isn't that funky? My dissertation was on the reform of healthcare. And the point was, of my dissertation, was that our religious communities have been left out of the reform of healthcare. And if you want to reform healthcare, you better get them back in. Otherwise, you will not have effective healing. And that was my dissertation.
I was wondering if I might comment a little bit, just from like the Eastern perspective, and from the previous slide, it wasn't on the slide, but you mentioned, sin as an aspect of the illness, and that kind of thing. And I thought, well, sin really comes out of the dualist traditions. I think it's more, you don't see that so much in the Eastern, but Don Miguel Ruiz, who I think comes more out of like the Toltec tradition, did a really good kind of translation of some of the Christian ideas, which flows into Latin culture definitely a lot, into a non-dual viewpoint. And so his version of sinning was called missing the mark. So say like in the dualist tradition, you don't say, well, sin is the bad thing or whatever, it's just karma, cause and effect. You do this thing happens or whatever. So a sin would be like if you wanted this thing to happen, but you're throwing that dart, you missed the mark. You did the wrong thing to get what you wanted to have happen.
Another ancient definition of sin is missing the mark. So I'm glad you put that one on the table.
And I think it also comes into like in your slide there that if an aspect of the illness is spiritual in a sense, and I've come into this myself, not like trying to heal people or whatever, but trying to help people.
Right.
And so you go into a situation, and like, here's my friend, they're in distress or whatever, and I try to help them. They had some car problems or whatever, but it just didn't go right, And then after that, my friend told me that he'd just recently gone over to his ex-girlfriend's house and beat up her new boyfriend.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, there's this weird karma going on, and that was the reason why I couldn't help the guy, because there's all these energies flowing. And so this is the kind of situation you get into where when you talk about that, you didn't say rebirth, but a recreation. So like if you really had to help somebody in that situation, they in a sense have to be recreated. They have to come out of that karma somehow.
That's right.
Oh, that's interesting.
And religion is among your strongest tools to recreate a person. If they take on a religious identity, and it doesn't matter which one, if you take on a different religious identity, you become a different person. And so that helps you recreate. And so this capacity to give people a new identity is part of the recreation that any religion has the capacity of doing. Certainly Buddhism does it every once in a while.
May I ask what your
Absolutely.
first definition of sin was? I can't remember.
It is the disruption of the world around you. Sin is damaging the world around you. Okay. I'm unendingly saddened by those that just use the word, and they use it as a battering ram in many religious traditions, particularly Christian. But they have no idea what the word really is trying to accomplish. It's truly an important word that if you don't define, if you define it, sin is just destroying the world around you. That's what sin is. If you just say you're sinning and you're a sinner and you need to be saved, and that's all you hear from a religious tradition, then you have no idea what they're saying, because you don't perceive yourself as a sin. You don't perceive yourself as a bad person. And so I'm being saved from what? I'm already a good person. Why do I need to be saved from anything? And so the whole tenor of particularly Christianity is to work is to use terms that no one really understands, and then just fling them at you an awful lot until you try and figure out what they mean. So that's why I changed the word. I don't use the word sin anymore. I use the word, you're destroying the world around you. You're destroying and then I also like to say you're destroying the relationships of everyone around you. Sin is the destruction of relationships of those who are around you. And if you say that, then now all of a sudden they have something they can agree with. Man, I came home last night and I just hollered at everybody. Okay, what was that? I got drunk and beat up my girlfriend.
Well, it's all in the
What was that?
perspective, you know, because it's
Yeah.
like from like a societal moral perspective, you could say, well, these people are sinning, they're living in sin, or you know, there's these porn shops going up down the street and all this kind of stuff. Well, people are living from another perspective, that isn't a sin at all to them, because that's what they do, and
That's
so
right.
so you know, that's why you kind of have to say, well, yeah. This kind of stuff may tend to bring other kind of stuff with it, you know, and so you end up with these, well, we're just going to call this stuff bad because it seems to flow with other badness that happens
Sure.
or whatever. But
And it allows you to become discerning. Let's use alcohol as an example. Alcohol is a wonderful beverage that clearly has beneficial effects. But it truly is one of the most destructive forces on the planet. Now, you've got to use your own maturity so that you don't arrive at that place in your life so that alcohol becomes a truly destructive force to everything around you. It could be wonderfully beneficial up until that moment. And somehow, how do you step back from and you can say that about your sexual relations, same thing. We wouldn't be here without, obviously, self-discovery. But at some point, it becomes destructive all around you. And if you don't have the capacity of maturely looking at those things and having tools in your quiver to help you to step back from when everything that is meaningful in our lives, food, my goodness, everything in our lives needs that mature outlook of saying, I must have the tools in my quiver to step back when it becomes destructive to those around me or to myself. And that's what the religions can do. Look at, Hinduism, Buddhism have given us great tools
I think
to step back.
Buddhism really shines because they tie all that stuff into desire.
That's right.
And so that's one of their main teachings, is to get control of your own desires.
That's right. And so if you can, then those things cannot be threatening to everyone around you. In fact, you will now have the tools to be loving to those around you, which is a great Buddhist incentive, is to love one another as well. So we need to understand the healing process. And so we've already begun to sort of sense out that there's a social issue we've got to worry about. There's a psychological issue we've got to worry about. I'll add a spiritual issue here in a fourth circle. But then there's the biological that you better work on. And all of those are important. I'd like to argue that there's 5 phases to illness resolution. Okay? First phase, you're going to try and treat it yourself. Right? You're going to go, you're going to go to the closet, you keep all your meds, you're going to hunt around looking for the med that worked the last time. You're going to take the med, or you're going to be mad at yourself because you ran out, and you'll go out to the store and you'll get another one. You'll be self-diagnosing and self-treating. And so that's the first stage that we all go through. The second is a social diagnosis. We'll start talking about it. And we'll go up to anybody we think might help. And we'll say, hey, I got this problem. Do you know anything about it? Okay, I got this problem. And we'll start passing it around. Now, we'll be careful because, if we've got syphilis, we're going to, it's going to cause some issues if we start talking about issues that'll create social waves in and around our community. But if we've just got, a fever, we're going to talk about it a lot. If we're drinking a lot and, oh my goodness, I can't stop drinking. I'm going through 2-liter water every hour. I'm just drinking this thing, and someone's going to look at you, and it's probably not a doc, but they're going to look at you and you have said, have you thought about diabetes? What's your sugar load? Oh, I better go talk to somebody, because I don't know. So social diagnosis, including the internet, is wonderful. Okay? But you better be aware social destruction also takes place as others flee from the ill. Just say cancer out loud and watch funky things. Say AIDS out loud. Watch funky things start happening around you. But cancer, I'm working through cancer myself. And it's hard to say cancer out loud because people aren't sure how you get it. And if they don't know, then they're not going to be around you. And so cancer is a funky. Social destruction can also come with that social diagnosis. Oh, have you thought about it? And then we try and get the free counseling. That's Googling. We try and get all the information we can get to help us to make our own decisions. And I'm glad it's free, because it's out there. The problem is, it includes going down to Mexico and sucking on apricots or something to cure my cancer. Oh, it's out there. It works for somebody. It's great stories, and someone's making a boatload of money, and they're going to really ramp up the marketing of this idea. So you better be careful that free is typically free. And then we go for paid counsel and therapy from a culturally approved therapeutic expert, otherwise known as a doctor. And then we can reintegrate it into society, but only if the expert says you can go now back into your community. And if they don't like it, and you've got something that society shouldn't have, tuberculosis is an example. If you've got TB, they're going to park you somewhere until you're doing better, and the expert can do that. So that reintegration in society begins the circle again, and you do that. So illness, but you can look at a lot more places where you can intervene. It isn't just the doctor that causes healing. It's all of these stages that you have a place to intervene into the healing of people. And so there's a lot more places now, if you think through that it's more than just going to the doctor and going home and taking your meds. It's a whole lot more than that. So if you know this, then you can begin intervening at different places. I'm not going to spend too much time here. So the source that I'm working with in Buddhism is Raoul Birnbaum's text, The Healing Buddha. And that's going to open the door to an evaluation of individuals who are involved in Buddhist healings in Chinese tradition. And so I'm going to introduce you to the term bodhisattva. Would anybody in the room like to define? I think we're all familiar with Buddhas. We've been talking about Buddhas a lot. What's a bodhisattva?
Isn't that one that has attained enlightenment that comes back to enlighten others rather than staying in the spiritual plane or
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they're middle ground people, middle ground entities. And you tend to use different terms in different religious traditions. We've already been talking about Saint Luke. And it's just special designations we give to people that do extraordinary things in and around themselves. Incredibly good. It is the opposite of sinners. It is the saintly ones. And so the bodhisattvas, people will talk, and so the other terms that you might hear are angels, those that are angels in and around them. Anybody that does something spiritually spectacular, we have a term for it. Well, in Buddhism, we have the term bodhisattva. These are highly evolved, yet with roots in human experience. They are documented in Scripture as being involved in healing. And so if something healing-wise happens in the Buddhist Scriptures, they almost always assume a bodhisattva was involved. It's just sort of, they go hand in glove. Is because when you hear of a spiritual healing, you ask the question, well, how did it happen? You assume that there's been a mediator that has allowed the healing to happen. And so in Buddhist tradition, they'll often say that a bodhisattva was involved. In the same way that we would say Mother Teresa should be sainted, and so it's Saint Teresa now. Why? Because she did so much good. She deserves the title of someone who has done well. And so bodhisattva is a term that we would use for those kinds of human beings. they're motivated by the thought of enlightenment coupled with the desire to help those in need. We've had lots of conversations on enlightenment, and it seems such a wonderful place to be in life. In fact, it sounds like the goal is to just be underneath the Bodhi tree for the rest of your existence and just enjoy your enlightenment. No, the Buddha did not do that. He got up from the tree and he started teaching others. So the teachings become what was the Buddha's desire to help those in need. They needed to know what their glasses weren't providing. They couldn't see something. But when the desire to help has a medical realm to it, you're helping people that are suffering. And so with the importance of suffering in Buddhism, those that can relieve suffering have a special place. And so bodhisattvas is often a way of indicating that special place. In an attempt to verify enlightenment, healing arts are used. Same thing we were seeing in the Catholic tradition. They were not going to allow someone to be a saint without verifying that they healed someone. In Buddhist tradition, they had to be able to heal someone before you believed that they were enlightened.
Or a miracle of some kind.
Some kind of miracle had to happen. Yeah. Something had to show that you're a distinct, over-the-top individual. Yeah. Can you think of any cases that
No,
in your
I
writings?
I know some great, either great or great aunts were like a miracle shy of being canonized, but I don't know them by name or anything like that. It's just the knowledge that comes down from the old country or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I did want to sort of clarify, bodhisattva doesn't necessarily mean that the person comes back and becomes a healer and becomes a teacher. It just means that they've gotten rid of the clinging karma and they incarnate over again. Now, we'd like them all to do that. I think that would be great, and Buddha's a great example of that. But I don't think there's nothing forcing them to, because they've already released all. There's nothing forcing them to do anything. So, yeah, we'd hope that they would do that.
I agree with your definition completely. Yeah. Yeah, very nice. So the Buddhist concept of healing defines most illnesses as psychosomatic disorders. What if that were true? What if most of the illness we have, it's all up here? Now we can't include your knee. I mean, your knee is hurting. Okay, we're just gonna have to live with that. But I know that pain is a mental process.
Yes.
We've talked about pain and suffering. We've talked about how, and Brett was very, very helpful in a past lecture when he made the nice comparison between suffering and pain. Pain is a biological process, but it's highly mental. Suffering is primarily mental with some biological process. Would that be a fair way of extending your thought?
Well, yeah, suffering is kind of how you deal with pain in the mind, in the sense that you can dwell on it and make it a worse thing. You can allow it to flow, but if you're like, oh gosh, I wish I wasn't sick, well, that's suffering, because you accept what is, because otherwise you make yourself suffer because you're like, oh, I want something to be different. Well, you're this way, and you're thinking of something else, and this, it's like it doesn't work because it's. Because just thinking that, oh, I wish I wasn't this way isn't necessarily going to help you out, and it may cause you more distress. And I think that's sort of why, a lot of these Eastern ones, they teach you all these meditation techniques, because once you control the mind, you can get rid of all that extra distress that's just being caused within the mind.
Sure. Remember my story of epilepsy? What did I say caused the epilepsy?
Stress.
Stress where?
In your family.
In my family. Yeah. So what happens if that stress went away? My mind would have settled down. So in that instance, in that story, that had a psychosomatic etiology or origin to it. Now, what other ones can we talk about? But we're not going to put your knees in this. There's going to be some real biology here we have to live with. What are some other? Let's talk about cancer. How much of cancer is derived from the mind dealing with the environment? Is that possible? Don't know, but I'd like to think about it. Psychosomatic illness in American usage has a negative term to it. We tend to say if someone is psychosomatically influencing illness, that they're a bit nutty.
Yeah.
That it's the reason most women have struggled in modern medicine is because they have heard that over and over again. It's just in your head. You just think you have pain. You just think you have this problem. But it's all in your head. And women have dealt with that far more than men have. Not that men haven't, but it's been very much a struggle for women because they've heard that over and over from their doctors, that this is a mental thing. Well, I'd like to say most illnesses are psychosomatic disorders. So we can somehow begin even looking at it with a positive, that there might be a positive outcome of saying how much is mental. If the placebo effect is going to be mental, and we learned 40% of that was healing ulcers, then wow, my mind might have some possibilities here on healing other things. Not everything, it's not going to make your knee feel better, but it will manage the pain you get from that knee. It will do. And Buddhism and Hinduism have documented how you can manage pain as a result of mind techniques. And so that means that there is a psychosomatic element to raw pain that can be mitigated from mind techniques. The prime disease is ignorance of how to live sanely in this world and attune one mind to the reality of existence. For this, the prime remedy is intuitive wisdom that arises when delusions and consequent negativity overcome. Buddhism is highly pragmatic. You're getting old. I'm sorry, don't mean to disrupt anything, don't mean to make you mad or anything. You're still getting old. Okay? Life is tough. Yeah, it's really tough. I'd love to go around the airy-fairy that, hey, I haven't had any problems, everything's great. Yeah. It's like this Albertsons when everybody comes through. How's everything? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Everybody's fine in Albertsons, but all of a sudden I walk out the door and everybody's life sucks. What happens between Albertsons and life? The mask of living comes off that we wear in Albertsons. And bad karma. And the Buddhist is going to say, get over it. You're going to suffer. You're going to die. Life is tough. And karma's flowing all around you. And it's bad. There's a pragmatic quality. And that competes with other religions that have not been quite so pragmatic. And I can think of the ER doc's nightmare is when a Christian comes in that assumes every disease they're going to encounter, God is going to heal them of. And when you talk to the ER docs, there's just so little they can do when that's the assumption of a religious person, that every disease in that bed is going to be healed by God, which is one of the wonderful stories why I like to tell the story of the 13. This year, in the entire world, there's going to be 13 healings. What's the likelihood you're going to be one of them? It's not good. The lottery has better odds than one of those 13. And And so that's sort of the challenge, that there are religious traditions that are incredibly optimistic about how often healing happens in their lives. And it creates extraordinary struggles. So optimism is wonderful at lots of levels. Pragmatism is really helpful here. I like to define, my definition of life is dying. That's my definition of life. Because that's the whole process. That's the whole biological process, is dying. That's all you're doing every day, is you're dying. You're dying. You're dying.
But you're creating
Get over it.
You're creating more cells.
But after about, in your 20s, don't know when the precise number would be, but in your 20s, you're running that biological, you've run over that biological hill, and you're on the downward slope of your biology after about the 20s for all of us. And so then there's lots of markers that tell us, and the telomeres is one of the ones that I've been working on in my genetics. The telomeres just get shorter and shorter and shorter every time they, which are the end points of all your chromosomes. And they get shorter every time they replicate. So there's literally a device that at some point it just runs out of room. And it's part of the cause of the aging process, is your shrinking telomeres. So that's happening in all of us. And so the disease will serve to spur the spiritually attuned onward to liberation. If you get a disease, is what they're saying, you've got incentive to be liberated. So yahoo, I'm sick. Yahoo, I'm dying. Yahoo, life sucks. Why? Now I've got incentive to move towards a liberation. So Buddhism has a real flipping here on how it wants you to perceive your life. It wants you to be far more pragmatic. And that's good, because we are getting sick and we are going to die. So we might as well be pragmatic in a certain way. Comments?
I was going to say, I do have a little story about death and a shaman. I didn't have any like healing shaman stories, but I got a death shaman story. If you want to.
Yeah, let's have that one.
Okay, so I had a friend, a fairly new friend. I'd only known for some months. We'd been doing some work, organizing hikes out in the desert to introduce people to environmental issues for the Green Party. And there was one of these hikes that I missed. And the guy I was working with had a massive heart attack, and he died on this hike. And I felt really bad, because he had called me up like 3 times, wanted me to go on this hike, and I couldn't do it. I was just in one of these situations where I was like, well, and anyway, so I wasn't there. But at the same time that he died, I was south and looking at the desert south of Boise, and I did feel something that I felt like was spiritual, with my awareness kind of shot out over the desert. And somebody else from North Idaho also felt something when this guy died. Now his girlfriend, I didn't find out for a couple of days, and somebody in the party called me and told me this had happened. So I called up his girlfriend and went over there, and she said we should go down, and see his body. So we jumped in her car and went down to Elko. They had life flighted his body to Elko, and she got permission from the parents to see the body until they prepped the body, and we hung out for like an hour anyway. And this is the closest I've gotten really to death. But we went in there, and the funny thing in my mind, the finality of it was not there until I saw him. I thought, we're going to see him, and he's just going to jump back to life. I had this idea in my head going that, he's not really going to be dead. But when I saw him there, he was a popsicle, we pulled him out of the freezer, and there was no life, there was no jumping back to life after that one. And she wanted to get some things off the body to use in a shaman ritual, and she wanted to get a piece of toenail, and he's got these hiking boots on, and they're thick leather hiking boots, and one of his foot's been deformed from some earlier injury that never got healed. So anyway, that's the shoe that's closest to us. So I'm like trying to get this frozen boot off so he can cut through the sock and get a little bit of his toenail or whatever. And I'm shaking this. He's on this table, you know, and he's shaking. I'm like, any minute the funeral director's going to come in here and we're going to get arrested, you know. So anyway, she got what she needed, and I was just like, let's get out of town. I was waiting for the cops to come after us, you know, because I thought this has got to be illegal, you know. But we went back up into the mountains where he had died. Decided we needed to go up there, and we camped out. And again, there was another kind of a spiritual experience that I felt happened there. But in any case, that was my experience with a shaman, and it's probably not a typical one since she was the girlfriend of the person who had died. But anyway,
What did she do with the twin?
I think she wanted to reincarnate. I think she got little bits of him, and she wanted to bring him back to life.
Great story. Thank you. Okay. Originally, Buddhism had an initial prohibition of the practice of the medical arts, so one could seek enlightenment. So early on, the Buddha said, no, you're not to be running around trying to heal people. You are to be seeking enlightenment. Later monks found the benefits of employing healing abilities, and they saw that it helped them in the spread of their Buddhist teachings, the Dharma, and in converting non-believers. So it was a bit of the healers on the television. I mean, literally, if you could show that you were successful in healing, you were going to build an audience, and Buddhism was going to grow. And so though it was restricted early on, it became pretty clear that good things were happening to people. And there needed to be some credit to the religious beliefs that was happening to them. And we can all now sort of realize what happens when the discipline of Buddha invades a person's life. They are going to be healthier, they're going to be economically stronger, and their family is going to be better by doing this. So you're going to see those benefits very structurally into the life of a person. And the monks wanted to start taking credit for it, so this was a missionary religion. We need to get more people hearing about the good things happening when we spread the Buddha's teachings around. And so some of the things that we have, as far as the Buddha himself, was motivated to begin his spiritual search after seeing a sick man. Remember that was part of the caravan story that came out of one of the traditions, that he had a parade, and this was when he was still a prince, and his father had protected him carefully from the world around him. He wanted to see the world, and so they put a parade on for him to show him the world, and the intent was, we're going to show you the best and we're taking you home, so you just go back and continue to be a good prince. He was the sole child of the king, and so they desperately wanted him to grow up and carry on the kingdom. But he got down from the parade and went into the side streets and saw a sick person. So that's the story I'm highlighting here, is that's what caused him to want to seek enlightenment, was seeing the sick person. And so tradition is that he saw a sick person, a dead person, a hermit, and there was a fourth one. I need to do my own exams. And so that experience caused him to want to be the hermit. He's portrayed in the Pali Canon, and there's a number of canons of the Buddha, which I was reading. Tonight I'm reading from the Japanese tradition. Is the book there? In the Pali Canon, as a great healer whose methods were twofold: healing through teaching, and psychic or miraculous healings. And so that's is being attributed to the Buddha himself, that he was capable of healings. Now, some of the miraculous healings. A laywoman, Supriya, who secretly cut off a section of her leg to provide a meat broth for an ill monk, was instantly healed by the Buddha, who then declared it was a grave offense to eat human flesh. So that was a sort of a cool little project. I mean, when you're starving, what do you do? And those great gifts. Those with incurable diseases received lessons on impermanence. Okay? So he just didn't go around healing everybody. He knew when he could help, and he could help physically, sometimes, socially and spiritually to everybody. So there's your social, spiritual, moral teachings that are tremendously helpful to people. You're not here forever. Get done today what you can do today. Don't wait for tomorrow, because tomorrow you're going to be sicker and you're going to be closer to death. Today is the day to get something done. Your life is changing. You are impermanent. And so... The seeking of new insight that could possibly lead to liberation. And so, is the liberation just that my sickness doesn't overwhelm me? Is that the liberation of some people? I think the answer to that is yes. Sickness can overwhelm you to the point of incapacity. If your spiritual journey will free you from that, you have found liberation. Of a little different type, but not too far off. There's also the egocentric focus of the process of healing, and on a positive side, that takes you towards yourself, solve what is inside of you. On a negative side, it keeps you from teaching others what you have learned. But the Buddha may have sought to heal the physical disease, but it seemed to serve as a pretext to the higher calling of offering a cure for the more nagging disease, that of ignorance and craving. If you keep wanting that bottle of your neighbor's wine, there's a downside to this. If you keep wanting your neighbor's wife or spouse, there's a downside to this. If you keep wanting knowledge that only makes your life worse, there's a downside to this. So that desire, ignorance, craving, we need to stop that, and you are going to solve most disease processes. A little later on, and again I don't have dates, of Sage Vimalakirti. Here's some. The body is always ill. Therefore, the ideal that he directed all towards was that of the Buddha body with perfect enlightenment. The Buddha died. We're going to learn that next time. He's going to die. Well, we're all going to die. But he attained something in his lifetime that was highly meaningful. You could do the same. So who cares if you got a Buddha body? You're going to die too. What are you going to do in the time you have for the enlightenment that is capable of? Illness should become a catalyst, the ultimate function of which is to stimulate renewed and increased dedication to spiritual work. So these are mind frames that they're trying to structure. Each must face the recognition that all people are equal when illness is the offending agent, and this recognition will yield a solidarity among people. Say the C word, cancer. We've all got it, seems like now. Well, we all have something to talk about. With this other-centeredness that results from understanding illness, a bodhisattva should increase one's resolve to come to another's aid. I'm sick too. Let me help you. Okay, so the bodhisattva inclination.
I think one place where
Please.
a bodhisattva can help, I think there's a possibility that illnesses are sometimes samskara. So like you may be getting the same illness that may have been impacted a previous life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there may be no external cause or whatever. I mean, you have this illness, well, there may be causes or whatever, but really there's an underlying spiritual cause, which is this echo from a previous life. And I think that's something I think a traditional doctor is not going to look for. Right? I mean, that's not on their menu But I think somebody who's incarnating over and over again is going to be able to notice something like that.
We train our doctors to not see what we're talking about tonight. We train them to be outside agent of healing, external to the person, very dispassionate with their compassion. Yes, have compassion, but it must be dispassionate. So if they're to die, you're not going to, you're not just not going to break down and be unable to continue serving. You have to have compassion for the moment and dispassion when it comes to long-term consequences of illness. So we train them to be dispassionate as well, retaining compassion for the patient, yet showing no mercy for the disease. Look past the illness, reminds a patient that life has a focal point outside oneself to point past the singularities. And so our physicians are designed to heal the vast majority of biological struggles you have in your life. That's their training. They're going to do a great job of it. They're going to help. My wife Lynette was in the doctor's today, and she's struggling to understand her rheumatoid arthritis. And they give her so little help right now. And it's frustrating when all they're dealing with is the biological entity, and they don't understand what entity is struggling her joints. And so it's tough on her right now. Those who are the bodhisattvas of healing, and those who attained enlightenment but choose to remain with others and not achieve nirvana. The key examples within the literature were the brothers King of Healing and Supreme Healer of Healing. The King, and I don't have dates, the King of Healing, the duty, and this is some of his writings, the duty of this teacher is to convey that the law to all those who may be ill. It is then the law that has the power to heal. For the teacher to attain the status of healing, there must be a sacrifice of self. There must be 5 prerequisites met before you can heal. Unceasing compassion, uncompromising deportment, filial piety, we'll talk about that when we get to Chinese philosophy, filial piety and 10 wholesome precepts. Abstain from murder, theft, adultery, lies, slander, use of harsh language, filthy talk, covetous thoughts, malice, heretical views, peace, and quiescence of mind, body and mind. Okay, that's what we were sort of talking about. Religion is going to give me the tools to point a finger at all these things and then not do them. That's what religion does. Listen to the expanded teachings without harboring doubts, neither drowning in emotions or backsliding in your own spiritual progress. And believe in the eternity of the Buddha, his mind unceasingly flowing like a running stream towards ultimate truth. So this is the Bodhisattva called the King of Healing. And so, and then how does it work? The devotee seeks to have a vision of the King of Healing. This vision offers the healing of the 404 diseases that inflict the body, and various fundamental teachings are transmitted. To obtain this vision, 5 meditations must be successfully cultivated. Stabilizing thought by counting breaths, pacifying your mind, non-exhaling a breath. I enjoy that one. Okay. Reflecting on the absolute form, and the serene abiding in the meditative trance. Now put those 5 against the 8 that we were working with the other night in yoga. So yoga is very important to this particular conversation as well. Buddha says that the successful contemplation of the Supreme Healer requires 7 prerequisites. Constant delight in holding to the precepts, cultivation of the methods for living in the world and the methods for becoming free of the world, free from arrogance and pride and compassion towards our being, passionless, abode in undifferentiated truth, cultivation of discernment and calming the mind, and freedom from fear or alarm upon attaining the perfection of insight. That's an interesting. We hadn't seen that before. When you get it, it's going to scare the bejeebers out of you. Enlightenment. Yeah, one thing is to search for it, another thing is to grasp it. And when you grasp it, that's why they flee to forests. The rest of them are what we call household lists. And these are moral lists that you see in religious literature all the time. 10 commandments for Hebrew thought. The 10 things you're to do if you're a good Hebrew. the two things of Jesus, love your neighbor, love God and love your neighbor. You see these as household lists in all the religions. And because we're sort of list doers, you know. If I have a list, I can get her done. And so you check off the list and boom, you get it done. So all the religions tend to have these lists and they're all fairly similar in a lot of ways. The distinctions, this one is quite unique. You don't see that in a lot of the religions. Passionless is sort of fascinating. And this freedom, you don't see this. Just like when you get it, you're in deep trouble. So like when you get to heaven, it's going to be, you're going to scare you it's going to, wow. Now, you don't get that in religions often.
I guess I can say something about that. So I mean, a part of healing is probably going into somebody and figuring out what's wrong. You know, I mean, and if you have anything going on inside your own psyche, it's gonna mask that. So it's like when they talk about, you know, flattening out the waves, right?
Yeah.
So once you do all that, any sensations or anything you have are coming in from the outside.
Yeah.
So that passionless, of course, you know, if you're passionate about what you're doing, then you're going to be blind to whatever's going
Excellent.
on.
I think that's a good way to define it. Excellent. Thanks. Any other comments? Okay, almost done. Then there's the master of healing. The Buddhists worship the master of healing demands a ritual use of the name and a desire to change one's lifestyle. Okay? So let's just sort of break that apart. Why will this be successful? Why will the ritual use of a name be helpful? I think we can all figure out if you change your lifestyle, things are going to change. But why the ritual and why the name? What's going on there? Why would it be healing? Why would doing your mantra, why would doing a mantra first thing in the morning be healing?
It's meditation.
Okay.
That's one type of meditation, but it's definitely the meditating. And if you include the changing one's lifestyle, then you know the illness is an outgrowth of whatever lifestyle is there. So,
what do you need to change your lifestyle? We've all done these January 1st projects, folks. We know they last for about 15 days and they're gone. What do I need to change my lifestyle?
A desire.
A desire, excellent.
oh well, maybe this is why you kind of need a single pointedness in your mind, and perhaps you know, chanting the same name over and over again may help you bring to that single pointedness. But otherwise, one part of your mind's going to say, "I want to go do this thing."
That's right.
You know.
So you need a singular focus, folks, to accomplish any life-transforming or habit-changing goal. You need singular focus. What else do you need to change your lifestyle? I'd argue you need a boatload of discipline. And just to have the ritual use of the name is increasing the capacity of discipline in your life. And so every religion will offer you discipline first. And the discipline will allow you to change your lifestyle. And the religious experience will be successful if you agree to the discipline that you're being asked of. So in Buddhism, you're asked for the ritual of Buddhism. With this dual intention, one can have spiritual rebirth and gain freedom from the patterns of unrestrained greed, anger, and egocentric emotional response. Okay? But now they're going to worry about something in Buddhism, and that's an intriguing worry. And every religion you need to be circumspect of, or turn the turtle over and see what the problem is. The other-centrism is often not centered on uplifting a neighbor, but looking past this person onto the path of desired enlightenment. Okay, so what's that saying? Our problem is in our immaturity of spirituality. We don't rest in our capacity to do good. We always want to give it a reason. Why? And I'm going to use Mother Teresa as the example. Did Mother Teresa help the poor in Calcutta because she wanted to go to heaven? Did she look past them? She wanted to go to heaven, so she helped the poor, but she really just wanted to go to heaven. Would you think that's the reason Mother Teresa really helped the poor? Okay. But if it was a 15-year-old first trip to Calcutta, no, they're trying to do something. They go onto the streets and they see a person in poverty asking them for their nickel. They reach in and they give them a nickel because I want to get to heaven. Do you see the maturity of that? That could be a rationale for a 15-year-old on their first visit to Calcutta, and they want to help the poor. That makes sense for someone immature in their faith. But the faith eventually matures to where you get past that. And you're not seeking your goal, enlightenment, heaven. You're doing it because the neighbor needs help. And you're past whatever the religious motivation was that caused you to act well. You get past it because it's not terribly helpful.
So fake it till you make it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it, because at some point you just make it. So you fake it early on, and you just do it. And use whatever tools you have to help the poor. If it's get to heaven, then you're going to heaven. Great. Would you go out and help that person again? One more star in your crown. Go help that person. And eventually they just enjoy helping them.
Well, I think that's where the religions really shine, because, you know, they give you all, like you're saying, all these lists of stuff you can do, and they're not automatically going to create all this grace flowing down upon you. But, you know, if you get to a point where, like, all of a sudden you do notice that, you're like, oh, wait a second, there it is. So.
Thank you. Last slide tonight. How to become a Buddhist spiritual healer. How do you become a Buddhist spiritual healer? Seek wisdom, input, aid each other, output. If you miss any of that, you become a cesspool. If you just want knowledge, you're just seeking wisdom, then you're just a cesspool of knowledge. To be a healthy river, you need wisdom and aid. And your life is a constant input, output, input, output. And if either of those, if you're given so much that you're collapsing yourself, then you haven't had time to get wisdom and to pause and to reflect and seek enlightenment. But once you've sought the enlightenment that comes with wisdom, if you don't turn around and help those around you, you are a cesspool of knowledge. And it's just as dangerous as jumping into the outhouse at Bergdorf. Not a pleasant thought to go roaring into those outhouses, but that's what we can become. But to be a Buddhist, develop a sense of pragmatism. We get old, we get sick, we die from our old age and sicknesses. So we want to help each other, but we're going to be pragmatic with our answers. You're in pain. Your mind is controlling the pain. Let's do something about what your mind can do. Let me teach you how to meditate. Control your mind. That'll help you in healing the mind-related issues that you're dealing with. Look past the illness and see the need to eradicate ignorance and destructive passion. So my call to you as I close tonight is to do the same thing. When you're in a room of total dysfunction, either the hospital or your own home, look around. Where can you be a spiritual healer and be a part of the solution of what has to happen before there will be healing in that room? What can you do? If you can biologically help, help. But if you can socially, spiritually, or morally help, help. Because in all likelihood, you'll do more to help the situation than the person functioning on only a biological level. And if you don't do it, Well, no one else in the room sees it, so they won't be doing it either. Almost a sermon tonight, wasn't
That's good.
Very good.
Moral encouragement, if nothing else. So that's what I worked on in my studies. So thank you for allowing me to sort of revisit it